My family hated my fiancée Sarah from day one. They sent fake screenshots to break us up. The night before our wedding, Jake showed up drunk, and my parents backed his every word. I'm Ethan, a 32-year-old software engineer living in Seattle, Washington. My life's been a wild ride, mostly because of my family. Growing up in Tacoma, I was always the good kid, the one who followed rules, got decent grades, and stayed out of trouble. My older brother, Jake, was the opposite. He's charming when he wants to be, but there's a manipulative streak in him that's hard to miss. He's the kind of guy who'd borrow your car, crash it, and then blame you for not checking the brakes. My parents, Robert and Linda, never saw it that way. To them, Jake could do no wrong. He was their golden boy, and I was just there. Jake's been pulling stunts since we were kids. Once he borrowed $200 from my savings for a business idea and never paid me back. When I brought it up, Mom said I was being petty. Dad just shrugged, saying, "Boys will be boys." That's how it always went. Jake's messes were my problem, and I was expected to clean them up or stay quiet. It wore me down, but I kept the peace for years, thinking family was supposed to stick together. Things got messier when Jake started dating Emily, a sweet girl from Bellevue. They seemed happy, and 3 months in, Emily introduced me to her best friend, Sarah. Sarah was different kind, sharp and grounded. We hit it off instantly. Coffee dates turned into late-night talks, and before long, I was head over heels. But Jake, he couldn't stand not being the center of attention. He'd make snide comments about Sarah, saying she was too good for me, or that I was punching above my weight. I brushed it off, thinking he was just being a jerk. What I didn't know then was how far Jake would go to control everything. Sarah and I were building something real, but my brother's shadow loomed large. My parents didn't help either. They'd call me up, asking why I wasn't supporting Jake's latest schemes, like the time he wanted to start a shady crypto venture. When I said no, Mom accused me of tearing the family apart. It was exhausting, but I held on, hoping things would settle. Sarah became my anchor. She saw through Jake's charm and called him out when he tried to manipulate conversations. It felt good to have someone in my corner, but deep down, I knew Jake wasn't done stirring trouble. I just didn't expect how low he'd sink to get his way. I'll never forget the day my world flipped upside down. It was a rainy Saturday in Tacoma, and I'd just gotten home from a long day at the office. My apartment smelled like coffee and betrayal. I walked into my bedroom and froze. There, tangled in my sheets, were Jake and Emily, my girlfriend at the time. My stomach churned. I stood there, mouth dry, as they scrambled to cover themselves. Jake didn't even look sorry. He just smirked, like he'd won some sick game. Emily stammered excuses, but I didn't hear them. I grabbed my phone, stormed out, and called Sarah. Sarah was Emily's best friend, but she was also dating Jake. I didn't know what to say, so I just blurted it out. I caught Jake and Emily in my bed. There was a long pause. Then Sarah's voice, shaky but calm, said, "I'm coming over." She showed up at my place in under an hour, her eyes red from crying. We sat on my couch, sharing a bottle of cheap wine, piecing together the mess. Jake and Emily had been sneaking around for weeks, maybe months. We'd both been played. The next day, I confronted Emily. She didn't even try to deny it. She just said she felt a connection with Jake and that I'd never understand. Jake, of course, acted like it was no big deal. "You'll get over it, Ethan," he said, like I was overreacting. 2 days later, they were posting couple photos on Instagram, flaunting their new relationship like a trophy. It stung, but Sarah's pain mirrored mine. She'd trusted Jake, just like I'd trusted Emily. We were both blindsided. Sarah and I started talking more, first as friends venting about our exes. We'd meet at a diner in downtown Tacoma, swapping stories over greasy burgers. She'd laugh at my dumb jokes, and I'd listen as she ranted about Jake's lies. Slowly, those late-night talks turned into something else. I noticed how her eyes lit up when she talked about her dreams of opening a bakery. She saw how hard I worked to build a life away from my family's chaos. 4 months after the betrayal, I asked her out. She said yes, and it felt like the first good thing in a long time. We were careful, keeping things quiet at first. Neither of us wanted Jake or Emily to know. But Tacoma's small, and word gets around. When Jake found out, he didn't take it well. He cornered me at a bar one night, his breath reeking of whiskey. "You're stealing my girl," he slurred, even though he'd dumped Sarah for Emily. I told him to back off, but his eyes had that wild look I knew too well. Sarah and I were falling in love, but I could feel Jake's shadow creeping back, ready to ruin everything we were building. Sarah and I were finally finding our rhythm. Our dates in Seattle's Pike Place Market, grabbing coffee and watching ferries glide across Puget Sound, felt like a fresh start. But Jake had other plans. About 6 months into our relationship, he found out we were dating. I don't know how. Maybe Emily saw us together, or maybe he was just sniffing around. Either way, he didn't waste time making things ugly. It started with a knock on Sarah's apartment door in Bellevue one rainy evening. I was there, helping her bake cookies for a work event. We opened the door, and there was Jake, uninvited, his jacket soaked and his eyes wild. "We need to talk," he said, glaring at me. Sarah told him to leave, but he pushed past her, stepping into her living room like he owned it. My fists clenched, but I kept my cool. He turned to me, his voice low and venomous. "You need to end this with Sarah. She's still in love with me." I laughed, thinking it was a bad joke. Sarah's face went pale, her hands trembling. "Get out, Jake," she said, her voice sharp, but he didn't wouldn't budge. He started spinning this delusional story about how Sarah was using me as a rebound, how she'd always come back to him. I messed up with Emily, he admitted, but Sarah's mine. You're just in the way, Ethan. The audacity floored me. This was the guy who cheated on her, broke her heart, and now he was claiming her like some prize. I told him he was delusional and needed to leave. He smirked, that same smug look from when I caught him with Emily. You'll regret this, he said, before storming out. The next day, my phone started blowing up. Texts from Jake, long paragraphs about how I was stealing his future. He said Sarah was confused, that I was manipulating her. I blocked his number, but then he started calling from burners. One message read, "She'll leave you when she realizes you're nothing." Sarah got similar texts, accusing her of betraying him. We tried to laugh it off, but it was unsettling. Jake wasn't just jealous, he was obsessed. A week later, he showed up at my office in downtown Seattle. I was leaving a meeting when I saw him leaning against my car in the parking lot. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice calm but creepy. He claimed he'd forgiven Sarah for moving on and wanted her back. I told him to get lost, but he grabbed my arm hard. "You don't know what I'm capable of," he hissed. I yanked free, my heart pounding, and drove off. When I told Sarah, she wasn't surprised. "He's always been like this," she said, her voice quiet. "He can't stand losing control." We decided to keep our distance, but Jake's words stuck with me. I knew he wouldn't stop. Sarah and I were planning our future engagement was on the horizon, but Jake was a dark cloud, ready to rain on everything we'd built. I just didn't know how far he'd go to tear us apart. Sarah and I were in the thick of wedding planning, picking out venues and tasting cakes in Seattle's Capitol Hill. We'd settled on a beautiful waterfront restaurant for the ceremony, with views of Puget Sound that felt like a promise of better days. But my family had other ideas. About 3 months before the wedding, my mom, Linda, called me out of the blue. Her voice was syrupy sweet, the kind she used when she wanted something. "Ethan, we need to talk about Jake," she said. My stomach sank. She went on about how I was tearing the family apart by not inviting Jake to the wedding. "He's your brother," she insisted, like that erased everything he'd done. I reminded her about his cheating, his threats, his unhinged behavior at Sarah's place. Mom brushed it off as silly drama and said I was being too hard on him. "He's changed," she claimed, without a shred of evidence. Dad, Robert, got on the phone next, echoing her. "Family sticks together, Ethan. Don't make us choose sides." I was floored. They weren't just defending Jake, they were acting like I was the problem. I told them Jake wasn't welcome, not after he tried to sabotage my relationship with Sarah. Mom's tone shifted, sharp and cold. "You're making a mistake. You'll regret cutting us out." I hung up, my hands shaking. Sarah, sitting next to me, squeezed my arm. "You did the right thing," she said, but I could see the worry in her eyes. We both knew my family wouldn't let this go. A week later, the calls started again. Mom left voicemails, pleading for me to reconsider for the sake of family unity. Dad sent texts, saying I was selfish for punishing Jake. Even my aunt in Portland chimed in, saying I should be the bigger person. It was relentless. I tried to stay calm, but the pressure was suffocating. Sarah and I were planning the happiest day of our lives, and my family was turning it into a battlefield. Finally, I'd had enough. During one particularly heated call, Mom said, "If Jake's not invited, we're not coming either." I snapped. "Fine, don't come." I uninvited them both. The silence on the other end was deafening. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. What kind of son uninvites his parents from his wedding? But then I remembered every excuse they'd made for Jake. Every time they'd dismissed my pain. They'd chosen him over me. Again, Sarah and I leaned on each other, focusing on the wedding. We wanted it to be about love, not family drama. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Jake and my parents were plotting something. They'd never been good at letting go, and I knew they'd find a way to make me pay for standing my ground. Little did I know, their next move would push me to my breaking point. With my parents uninvited and Jake out of the picture, Sarah and I thought we could finally focus on our wedding. We were wrong. About 2 months before the big day, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Sarah's not who you think she is," it read. I rolled my eyes, figuring it was a spam bot, but then another came. "She's cheating on you." My heart skipped a beat. The messages were vague at first, just enough to plant doubt. I showed Sarah, and she laughed it off. "Probably some bored troll," she said, but her voice wavered. The texts didn't stop. They got creepier, more specific. One included a blurry screenshot of a supposed chat between Sarah and some guy, full of flirty emojis. It was obviously fake. The timestamps didn't even make sense, but it rattled us. I knew Jake was behind it. His obsession with Sarah hadn't faded, and this felt like his twisted way of getting back at me. I blocked the number, but new ones kept popping up. By the third day, they were coming at all hours. "You're making a mistake," one said at 2 a.m. "She'll ruin you." Sarah's phone started getting them too, accusing her of using me. Her hands shook as she deleted them. We tried to stay strong, but the constant ping of notifications wore us down. Then the calls started. Late at night, my phone would ring from a blocked number. I'd answer, and a low, muffled voice would say, "You'll regret marrying her." The first time, I hung up, my stomach in knots. Sarah sat up in bed, her face pale. "It's him, isn't it?" she whispered. I didn't want to scare her, but I nodded. Jake's voice was hard to disguise, even distorted. The calls came every night, sometimes after midnight. night, each one more menacing. "She's lying to you," the voice hissed once. "Break it off before it's too late." We went to the Seattle police, hoping for help. I showed them the texts, the call logs, everything. The officer listened patiently, but shook his head. "Without hard proof, we can't trace anonymous numbers," he said. He suggested changing our numbers and blocking the callers, but that felt like letting Jake win. Still, we had no choice. We changed our numbers, hoping for peace. For a few days, it worked. The silence was a relief, like waking up from a bad dream. But Jake wasn't done. A week later, Sarah got a DM on Instagram from a random account. "You don't deserve Ethan," it said. "You'll destroy him." The tone was venomous, eerily similar to the texts. I checked the account, 0 followers, no profile pic. Classic Jake. We blocked it, but new accounts kept appearing, each more aggressive. One sent a fake photo of Sarah with another man, clearly photoshopped but still unsettling. "You can't trust her," another message read. Sarah's anxiety spiked. She'd jump every time her phone buzzed, and I could see the toll it was taking. I felt helpless, watching her shrink under the weight of it. We tried ignoring the messages, but they were relentless. Notifications haunted us, day and night. Finally, we made a tough call. We deactivated our social media accounts. It felt like cutting off a lifeline, but we needed to breathe. The moment we went offline, the harassment stopped. The quiet was almost too good to be true. Sarah and I focused on the wedding, picking out flowers and finalizing the guest list. But deep down, I knew Jake wasn't finished. He'd always been one step ahead, and I braced myself for whatever he'd try next. With our social media accounts gone, Sarah and I finally had some peace. We threw ourselves into wedding prep, finalizing details at our venue in Seattle, and picking out a new cake-flavored chocolate with raspberry filling, Sarah's favorite. For a moment, it felt like we'd outrun Jake's chaos, but that calm shattered 1 week before the wedding. We'd spent the day in Kirkland, where we lived, running errands and dreaming about our future. When we got home that evening, something felt off. The front door was slightly ajar. My heart sank. Inside, the house looked normal until Sarah walked into our bedroom. She screamed, and I rushed in. Her wedding dress, the one she'd spent months choosing, was ruined. Black ink soaked the delicate lace, pooling on the floor like a cruel stain. Sarah collapsed onto the bed, sobbing. "Who would do this?" she whispered, her voice breaking. I held her, my own hands trembling with rage. That dress wasn't just fabric, it was her dream, our promise to each other, destroyed. I checked our security camera footage from the front door. At 3 a.m. the night before, a figure in a hoodie crept up to our house. The video was grainy, but the way they moved, the slight limp, the familiar slouch pointed to my mom, Linda. I didn't want to believe it. My own mother, sneaking into our home to ruin Sarah's dress? It was a new low, even for her. Sarah watched the footage, her face pale. "It's her, isn't it?" she said quietly. I nodded, my throat tight. I couldn't deny it anymore. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house in Tacoma. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. When I got there, Mom and Dad were in the living room, acting like nothing was wrong. I didn't waste time. "I saw the footage," I said, my voice shaking. "You broke into our house and destroyed Sarah's dress." Mom's eyes widened, but she played dumb. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, folding her arms. Dad just stared at the floor, silent as always. I pulled out my phone and showed them the video. They didn't even flinch. "That could be anyone," Mom snapped. "You're paranoid, Ethan." I wasn't buying it. I knew their game: deflect, deny, make me feel like the crazy one. "You've gone too far," I said. "This isn't just about Jake anymore. You're trying to ruin my life." Mom scoffed, saying I was overreacting and that Sarah wasn't worth this drama. That was it. I told them they were done in my life, no more chances, no more excuses. I walked out, their protests echoing behind me. Sarah and I scrambled to find a new dress. By some miracle, a local boutique in Seattle had a similar one in her size. It wasn't perfect, but seeing Sarah smile again made it worth it. We were so close to our wedding, and I refused to let my family steal our joy. But as the big day loomed, I couldn't shake the feeling that they had one last trick up their sleeve. I just didn't know how bad it would get. The night before our wedding, Sarah and I hosted our rehearsal dinner at a cozy restaurant in Capitol Hill, Seattle. The place was perfect: twinkling lights, a view of the city skyline, and our closest friends laughing over wine. For the first time in weeks, I felt like we'd made it through the storm. Sarah looked radiant, her smile brighter than ever. I was starting to relax, thinking we'd finally left the drama behind. Then the door swung open, and Jake stumbled in, reeking of whiskey. His eyes were bloodshot, his shirt half untucked. The room went quiet. He staggered toward our table, pointing a shaky finger at Sarah. "She's a gold digger," he slurred, loud enough for everyone to hear. My heart stopped. Sarah's face drained of color, her hands gripping the table. I stood up, trying to stay calm, but rage boiled inside me. "Get out, Jake," I said, my voice low. He ignored me, spewing insults. "She's using you, Ethan. This marriage is a joke." I glanced at the crowd, our friends, Sarah's family, all staring in shock. Then I saw my parents, Robert and Linda, standing near the entrance. They weren't stopping him. Mom nodded along, her lips pursed, like she agreed with every word. Dad just stood there, arms crossed, silent as always. It hit me like a punch. They were in on this. They'd come to ruin our night, maybe our whole wedding. I grabbed Jake's arm, pulling him toward the door. "You're done here," her, I growled. He fought back, yelling about how Sarah would take everything and leave me broke. I didn't care about his lies anymore. I shoved him outside, into the cool Seattle night. He stumbled, still shouting, "You'll see, Ethan. She'll ruin you." I turned to my parents, hoping they'd at least leave quietly. But Mom stepped forward, her voice icy. "You're making a mistake, Ethan. We're just trying to save you." Save me? After everything, Jake's threats, the ruined dress, the harassment, they thought they were the heroes? I was done. "You're not welcome here," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Not at the wedding, not in my life." Mom gasped, like I'd slapped her. Dad just stared, saying nothing. Jake lunged at me, but I pushed him back, watching him trip into a flower bed. "Stay away," I said, my words final. I turned to Mom and Dad. "All of you, get out." They left, Mom muttering about how I'd regret this. The restaurant was silent when I walked back in. Sarah was in tears, her hands covering her face. Our friends looked shell-shocked. I knelt beside her, promising we'd get through this. But inside, I was breaking. My family had crossed every line, and now they'd turned our rehearsal into a circus. As I held Sarah, I knew the wedding was our chance to start fresh. But I also knew my family wasn't done trying to tear us apart. Tomorrow was our day, and I'd be damned if they ruined it. The morning of our wedding, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. After the chaos at the rehearsal dinner, I half expected Jake or my parents to try something else. But Sarah and I were determined. We'd hired extra security for the venue, a stunning waterfront restaurant in Seattle, and focused on what mattered, our love. As I stood at the altar, watching Sarah walk down the aisle in her new dress, my heart swelled. She was breathtaking, her smile cutting through all the pain we'd endured. The ceremony was perfect. Our friends, Sarah's family, and a few colleagues filled the room with warmth. We exchanged vows, promising to stand by each other, no matter what. When I slid the ring on her finger, I felt free, like I'd finally escaped the weight of my family's toxicity. The reception was a blur of laughter, dancing, and toasts. For those few hours, it was just us and the people who truly cared. No Jake, no parents, no drama. That night, as we lay in our hotel room, Sarah rested her head on my chest. "Why do they hate us?" she asked, her voice soft. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that Jake, Mom, and Dad had crossed lines I couldn't forgive. The texts, the ruined dress, the rehearsal dinner stunt, it wasn't just about control, it was cruelty. I held Sarah close, promising to protect her from their poison. Cutting out my family was the hardest thing I've ever done. Growing up, I'd been taught family was everything. But standing there, watching Sarah laugh with our friends, I realized family isn't blood. It's the people who show up, who lift you up, who love you without conditions. My parents and Jake weren't those people. They'd chosen manipulation over love, and I was done letting them hurt us. As we drove to our honeymoon in the San Juan Islands, I felt lighter than I had in years. Sarah and I were starting a new chapter, one where we defined our own family. I don't know if Jake or my parents will ever change, and honestly, I don't care. They made their choices, and I made mine. Was I wrong to cut them out completely? Maybe some will say I should have kept the door open, but after everything, betrayal, harassment, sabotage, I chose peace. I chose Sarah. And standing here, hand in hand with my wife, I know I made the right call.